Alright, what's up my viewers? I know I promised you all a knife from Montana in my last review, but I think I came up with a pretty unique idea for a series, and I think I'm going to alternate between a regular plain gear or knife review and what I like to call story time with iron wings. You see, we have all these different reviews from users and producers who buy a knife from a shop or from a Walmart, they use it for a day or two, and then they share their thoughts and opinions on it, even though they've only carried it for a day or two. So I figured, since there isn't any connections there, I asked myself, what if I reviewed my most personal and cherished knives, shared the stories that came along with them, and then could I be honest if I have owned them and have a bias towards them? So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome you to the first edition of Storytime with Iron Wings. So, for my first episode, I decided I wanted to take you back to my college days with this knife. This is a CRKT Clever Girl. It is a SK5 steel. It's about 5 inches long for the blade, and overall about 10 inches according to the CRKT website, with a handle of G10. It's made by a man named Austin McGlawn. He's a veteran, and this is designed for the Forged in War series. For those of you who don't know, the Forged in War series is the program CRKT has where they got a bunch of veteran knife makers and forgers, blacksmiths, bladesmiths, whatever you would like to call them, had them draw up some designs, create some designs for knives CRKT could produce, and they will manufacture them, sell them, and donate a portion of the profits to that veteran's chosen charity for veterans' health. In this case, Austin McGlawn decided to go with the Green Beret Foundation. The whole reason I decided to come up with the series is because this knife is actually one of the knives that will never leave my collection. There are about 10 of them. And those are my, I guess you could say, the Untouchables collection. This, my Rockasan, and a few other assorted knives we'll go into later, will never leave my possession. I will not sell them no matter how broke, how many bills I accrue. These will stay in my possession, and you'll probably see why in a bit. So, the story begins with my college days. When I was in college, I was up one morning about a week before or after my birthday, I can't remember which, and I was going to go grocery shopping for my dorm room because, you know, college students, no one pays for their own food, just steal the other guys. I look in my bank account and I see the school deposited an extra $300 into my bank account, and this was because they overcharged me. I initially thought that someone had taken a loan out in my name or used my student account to take out a loan for them, and the school made a mistake. I asked them and they said no, they overcharged my account. They overcharged me. So they refunded that money, and well, I decided since it was my birthday I'd not only go and get groceries, but I'd pick myself up a new knife. I was looking for a $1.55 or a $1.10 because those are some of my favorites. That's a story for another day. And first I checked the local gun shop I go to up there. Problem being, I can't buy any guns because I'm in a dorm room. Obvious reasons why there. They don't have any knives I'm interested in. They had a couple of Bowie knives from Solingen, Germany that were just beat to hell. It was basically a tang, a pommel, no handle, and the knife. So, since he was fresh out of knives that I liked, I went to another place I'd never been before called Pacific Outfitters. Now, Pacific Outfitters was this little hole-in-the-wall outdoor and camp shop, mostly sold bikes, fishing gear, that sort of thing, for camping out or hiking outfits. And they, right in the front of the store, had this little, maybe 5-foot display case, almost entirely empty, for knives, and there was something like 5 or 6 models on display for sale. One of them was the CRKT Hootenanny, which I remember I did buy. That'll be reviewed at another time. and I bought it to replace my CRKT Fulcrum, which had kind of at the moment fallen out of favor with me, and I still wish I had another one of those suckers. Then there was a $1.55, no, $1.10 that I did pick up, and I got it for like 20 bucks because it was the floor model. So scuffed up, tons of people had handled it, and it was fairly dull. Not blunted, but just dull from being used to demonstrate sharpness. And then there was this knife. So the thing about the Clever Girl is I just liked the design. I knew nothing about Austin, knew nothing about the designer, the program, nothing. I just liked this upswept blade, the thick stock and spine, and I was skeptical about the handle, but once I actually got a hold of it, I fell in love with how it felt in the hand. So what I did is I haggled the dude down because it was also a display model, and I told him I would just go ahead and buy it if he knocked $5 off it. Dude did it because they were liquidating the knife stock, which is why the case was mostly empty, and I took it home with me. Nothing about this knife, nothing about the creator. I'm in the dark. I just knew that it was a cool knife, and I thought it would be nice to have in the back of my car for defense or as a tool, whatever, what have you. So I go home and I throw this in the glove box. I'm in the dorm room and I decide, I don't know anything about this CRKT Clever Girl. At the time I was calling it a Clever Girl because I thought that's what the name was. So I got it, looked it up, looked up Austin, looked up CRKT's website, the YouTube channel, and what was the biggest coincidence I think I've ever had in my life is that Austin McGlawn, the guy who created this knife, also sells a knife named the Rockasan. Now, I do own that knife. That will be another story time because it's another interesting deal. But I didn't know anyone who knew that name, and it sent off a red flag to me. For those of you who don't know, and this is, well, that's most of you because this is the first time I've mentioned it on this channel, I served in the U.S. Army, the 101st Airborne, 3rd Brigade, 187th Infantry, the Iron Rockasans. So when I saw a knife named the Rockasan included on his CRKT website, his page, that sent up some red flags to me because it's not a super common word or title for a knife. So I dug a little bit further in, and it turns out he and I, a few years apart, served in the same Army unit, not in the same company, but in the same battalion. And I was amazed by that, like dumbfounded. I actually shot Austin a message because I found him on Facebook and told him, dude, you're not going to believe this. I am a college student, an Army veteran, currently going to school in a podunk, Northern California town. Went to an outdoor shop and I bought your knife. We both had a good laugh at that because what are the odds of two men both serving in the same unit just a few years apart being brought together by a knife despite being separated hundreds if not thousands of miles apart, him being in the south, me being on the west coast. So that coincidence to me is what really kind of makes this knife special because without any prior knowledge, without any prior experience, I just like the design of this knife, and it turns out that when I bought it, I was buying something my brother in arms made, and that's just something you can't put a price on. That story, that cosmic, I don't know how to classify it, kind of like a divine intervention. That's something that makes this knife truly special to me and makes it why I will never buy or sell it. I won't buy another one because it won't mean as much to me as this specific one, and I will never sell this one. So now that I've expanded on why I love this knife, what makes it so special to me, let's go ahead and cover some of the pros and some of the cons of this blade. So, for the pros, this thing was wickedly sharp and honed out of the box. Despite being a display knife, this thing is still, while not razor sharp, still fairly sharp. And you'll see that during the cut tests. It's a great design for both slicing because of that long, curved belly, and great for poking for that sharp tip. While YouTube doesn't like talking about anything that's, how shall we say, violent, this would be great on a camping trip for you if you're working the grill. Just poke it into a chop or a source of meat and flip it over if you don't have tongs. Another pro is the G10. The G10 grips may look awkward, especially with these striations in them, but I got to assure you they are extremely comfortable in the hand. I was even skeptical of them when I first bought it, but it's grown on me immensely. I love this thing, and I really am confident this would not slip in my hand if I were to start using it to gut fish or skin a deer. The final pro I want to go over is the thickness of the stock. It is extremely thick steel and thick spined, which means this thing will flex, but it won't break or warp, I don't think, very easily. So, with every pro, I had to ask myself, what are the cons of this knife? Now mind, this isn't me being a dick to Austin, this isn't me saying I know better than him, this is just some of the things I noticed that could have been done a bit better on this knife. For example, the weaker heat treat. This is kind of one of those things where it's meh, kind of pro, kind of con. The weaker heat treat means you have to sharpen it more often, but it means it's easier to sharpen, which is great for a combat knife. If you use this in the combat zone, you want to be able to just throw it onto that stone you have in your backpack or a sheath that's like the size of a small smith stone, a diamond stone, and then it's sharp again, and you can just throw it back in the sheath and keep on going, keep on trucking. When it comes to some guy who wants to dress out a deer with this, he doesn't want to keep going back to the stone over and over and over. He wants to get as much done as he can out of a blade in one use. So the heat treat, while Austin has specifically stated in numerous interviews or conversations I've had with him, these knives are specifically designed for combat, in another walk of life, the weaker heat treat on this knife can be somewhat problematic. The handle, if you see here, is a bit too long for the ungloved hand. You just got this little skull crusher, glass breaker, lanyard hole hanging off the back. So, this is another one of those things where it's kind of a different walk of life. This is a combat knife. You have to approach this as a combat knife and not a hunter's knife. In the vein of this being a combat knife, it's understandable that extra handle length, because if you're overseas, you have those giant leather goatskin gloves on with the wool inserts. This handle is going to be much more able to be held on to. That extra length of the handle is going to give you a bit more leverage to secure your grip. But still, when you're a hunter, that little extra length can just kind of feel odd because you don't really know right where to grip it when you pull it out of the sheath. The balance is a bit heavy towards the handle, which in this case, again, all the cons that come with this knife are all about perspective. Are you the everyday carry type who's going to use this for hunting, kitchen duty, camping, what have you? Or is this going to be a knife you need to have to save your life? This is the last resort. This is going to keep you from getting killed. In a combat situation, you want a bit more of that heft in the handle so you can go for faster strikes and have a quicker recovery time. It's more tactile, it's more nimble, so you're able to get in, get out quicker. But on a hunting knife, I don't know. With me, my hunting blades, my skinning knives, I prefer a bit more weight in the knife itself, because then I can just let it glide. You don't have to apply as much pressure, and it takes a lot of the work out of actually having to skin or work with it. So what are my overall thoughts when it comes to the Clever Girl, the CRKT? So, to start with, I think it's one of my favorite knife designs, and it's always good to see a brother doing awesome. It's always good to see him doing something that he absolutely loves and succeeding in that field. I think it is one of my favorite knives because of the unique backstory that comes along with it, but there are going to be pros and cons that come with this blade. On one hand, it is purpose-built, it is purpose-designed, and with that purpose in design, the versatility that I like isn't really there. You can still use it, but you're going to have to take the cons that come along with the pros of this specific combat knife intent. The ergonomics are going to be pretty funky to start out with, especially with that weight in the back end on the butt of the knife and the extra length on that handle. The heat treat, you're going to get a lot duller faster, but you're going to be able to sharpen it up much easier. But the biggest gripe I have about this knife that I didn't go over really because I was saving it for later is this. The CRKT Sheath. Now, this is a Kydex sheath, pretty standard, pretty norm, but it's designed to fasten to military and police law enforcement equipment. Now, this might not be a big deal for guys who wear plate carriers, for someone who wants to carry this on an everyday purpose, who just wants to use it. It's kind of awkward, especially because of how wide the clip this is. It'll just sit there and waggle on your belt the whole time you're using it. What I think could be done to improve this design for the sheath through CRKT is, and this might be something they already do, I could already be ignorant on this, so if I am, my apologies. They should either sell an adapter for regular belt shot sizes, a regular belt loop clip, or my idea, and I think this is a decent idea, put a belt loop on the opposite side. Because, and hear me out here, you can still attach this knife to a plate carrier by this means with this clip on the back, and this belt loop on the front will not affect the function of the knife. At the same time, if you don't have a plate carrier, you can remove this, leave this off as an average user, attach it to the belt, and you'd have to, yes, draw the knife blade up, but it would feel a lot more secure and it would give a little bit more versatility to this knife than it already has. So now that we've covered the pros, the cons, the story behind this knife that I have, and what I honestly think of it, which I think is a fairly unbiased take, we'll go ahead and cover the sharpness. Now, as I stated, I did use this knife quite a bit. Since I got it out of the box, I have not touched it up or sharpened it. You can actually see that it's untouched by a stone. And while I have used it, it does feel somewhat sharp. So, how does it cut? Here we have a piece of regular cardboard, and I like using this because it presents a good amount of resistance to the blade. It doesn't just pass through like printer paper. So, see how it cuts even after a use. And I mean, it skips a little, but it's out of that cardboard, cutting little curlicues like that. So even after a good amount of use, it's still fairly sharp enough to cut through cardboard. How about stock paper? If you've seen Chris on that company to be named later's YouTube channel, you'll see that he likes using thick cardstock. I kind of prefer using this Target paper because while it's not as thick as cardstock, I think it's a good compromise between cardstock and printer paper because it adds that resistance of the printer paper, or it adds the resistance of cardboard or cardstock, but it's still enough give that it'll crumple up and wrinkle. So let's see if it'll cut through this easily. Towards the belly, I've had to reshoot this video 3 times, either because I didn't like the lighting, I didn't like the angle, or I didn't think it covered in depth enough the actual content of this knife. So It's a little bit duller than I expected, but you can see it is cutting and doing curly cues fairly well. And then final test, you'll see this here. This is, oh yeah, you can just feel it biting easily without any pressure, and then it just scrapes off that thin layer of keratin right on the thumbnail. So this, even after use, retains a decent edge. So in some ways, I feel this kind of verifies that while this knife does wear, it's not as much of a big deal as some people say, because some people will look at what I think is a Rockwell hardness on this knife for the heat treat of 54 to 56. I've beat this knife to hell and back. It may not show it, but this knife has cut through dozens of cardboard boxes since I've owned it, cut them down so that they can fit into a dumpster, and it's still sharp enough to actually shave off some of my thumbnail or two shave arm hair. So while we may look at this knife's Rockwell hardness or design other cons, I'd still say this knife is well worth it. It currently sells for, I want to say, let me look at this real quick. They no longer have it priced on CRKT. I think it's around $80 to $90 on Amazon. I think it's well worth the purchase just because when you buy it, you're helping causes in regards to veterans. You're helping people out, and you're encouraging men who fought for this country to try something new, to go out and say, you know, I like knives, I'm going to try and make a living with them. So should you go out and buy this? I'm going to say of course you should, just because I think it's a great knife. There are cons and pros that come with it. There are negatives to this knife, but I think there is a lot more to enjoy with this blade than there is to see the bad in it. The question is, what do you think? Let me know down below. I promise you next week I'll try and get that Montana knife reviewed for you guys. And after that, I think I'm going to go ahead and cover a recent blade that I picked up budget-friendly from Walmart. See if it's all that it's cracked up to be. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the first episode of Storytime with Iron Wings, and I'll talk to you guys later.